Hello and welcome to the Ghibli Rewatch series of the Overly Animated Podcast, where we'll be going through every Studio Ghibli movie chronologically from the beginning. I'm Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by April Collins.
Hi there!
And Alex Bonilla.
Buongiorno.
Yes, a hint at what movie we're talking about, but this is the Ghibli Rewatch series. Join us in rewatching or watching for the first time all the Studio Ghibli movies now that they're available for streaming for the first time ever on HBO Max in the United States and Netflix in most of the rest of the world. New podcasts every Wednesday as we go through the whole Studio Ghibli catalog. Find all of the ways to contact us at overlyanimated.com. I'm a Ghibli expert and be joined by co-hosts with a variety of Ghibli experience, and today we're talking Porco Rosso. Very interesting one to get into. Make sure you've seen Porco Rosso. We're getting onto full spoilers for this movie. Only vague spoilers for the rest of the Ghibli catalog if you have not seen any other film, any of the other films. We'll be talking, doesn't matter if you've seen subbed or dubbed, we'll be talking about whatever the people on have seen, primarily subs, but watch whatever you prefer. Let's get into Porco Rosso. We are in 1992 here, for our next Hayao Miyazaki film. This one is based on his own very short manga he made as part of a collection of kind of whimsical pig hero stories. It was initially conceived of as a short film for Japan Airlines, and then expanded into a full feature. Similar.
Well, was it like Porco telling you put on your seatbelt if you want to be safe?
I don't know. I don't think it was a safety instructional video. It's just it was going to be like a legit, I think, like 45-minute thing. But this happened a few times. I think with Miyazaki, ended up expanding it to a full thing. He some context, as we talked about on the Kiki podcast. He's pretty exhausted after Kiki, and then apparently he helped in producing Only Yesterday as well. And those are two similar-ish movies, so he wanted a change of pace, and we got it with Porco Rosso. This is a movie about a former World War I pilot, now bounty hunter, and a pig, Porco, or formerly known as Marco. So, a lot of interesting things to get into. It's a different type of movie than some of the previous ones we've been talking about. But first, let's go through what your history is with this movie, and what did you think of it upon watching or rewatching it, April?
So, I've seen this movie multiple times, and one of my best friends, this is actually his favorite Ghibli movie, so it obviously has a near and dear place in my heart. I like this movie. It's interesting. It captures my attention. I love the music in this movie so much. I did something interesting because normally I always watch this movie subbed, but I actually watched it dubbed. So I have some interesting, I guess, like feedback about that. For instance, I prefer it I prefer subs typically, but it was interesting to watch the dub. I didn't like this movie dubbed. So
How did you like Batman as Porco, Michael Keaton?
Oh, no. Like, I think my biggest, like,
I think that kind of checks out Batman being Porco. Yeah.
Well, they like added dialogue and then like changed it a lot. So, and I found the movie more problematic dubbed versus subbed.
Interesting. You can get into some of those things you noticed. I haven't seen it dubbed in a while, so I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I still enjoy this movie. I love it. I don't know why, but I always feel like planes and like aviation has like a near and dear place in my heart. So I guess me and Miyazaki have that in common.
For sure.
But yeah, so still enjoyed it. Still great. I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yay. Okay, well, this is the plane movie, so if you like planes, this is, Wind Rises probably second. Maybe, but okay. A lot of planes talk. I don't know how much there's to say about the planes, but maybe we'll see.
Especially considering I don't think any of us are aviation experts.
April just said she loves planes, so we'll see what she has to say about the planes.
I've had a lot of friends who were pilots and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, and my ex was a pilot as well, and I grew up by an airport, so.
How many planes have you flown in? I mean, other than like, have you flown any non-commercial airplanes?
Yeah, I've
Okay.
flown in a lot of non-commercial airplanes. And what is it? Like my ex, his family actually owned a plane, so
Okay.
it was like a 6-seater plane. So
Wow. This is infinitely more plane experience than me, and I assume Alex. But
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So we have a plane expert kind of April here. So Alex, though, what about you? What's your history with Porco? What do you think of the movie?
I'm not a plane expert, so that's out of the way.
what?
Are you a pig expert?
Well, I've seen a pig in real life before.
That's like the bare minimum.
Yeah. I feel like I probably petted them at some point.
Okay.
But like, so with Porco Rosso, I just watched it for the first time this weekend. Before this, the only knowledge I had of Porco Rosso was the meme of rather a pig than a fascist. Like that, and I think that's most people's entryway into knowing that this movie even exists. Is just that.
I don't know if that's a more recent thing, but that's definitely the most current famous thing about the movie.
Right. And so like that's literally the only thing I know about this movie going in. So after watching it, I'd say that this is a fun movie as all Miyazaki movies have been so far. It definitely feels like it has a bit more of a story compared to like the slice of lives that have been covered recently, like Totoro or Only Yesterday. Like there does feel like there's a little bit more of connective tissue, but it still feels very loose in that like the plot points, so to speak, are not exactly like don't feel as high stakes as maybe other movies. But so like the movie itself felt very, very nice, very smooth. But my main takeaway is that Porco himself is a character I really sympathize with because to the point. Because the thing is, up to this point, like most of the Miyazaki movies have been focusing from kids' perspectives. You had Lupin at the very beginning, and like that's like sort of an adult. And since then, like you haven't really had much in the way of like adult main characters until Porco. And I gotta say, like I enjoy following around a grump for once in this world in this filmography full of optimism and like things will get better. This pig who has been worn down by the heavy ills of society and just kind of just like in it for himself sort of thing, like that feels almost kind of refreshing as you're going through this this list of movies. So while Porco Rosso, like as a whole, like there's like stuff that I'm like not that into and stuff that's fine. So like as a movie, it's okay, but Porco himself is probably one of my favorite characters that I've encountered in this Ghibli rewatch so far. Just because, like, I feel Porco energy a lot in my life, and he's cool, and also he has a cool mustache. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Porco, good. Porco Rosso, as the movie, okay.
Okay. Well, I like your take on Porco as a character, so we can get into that. We'll talk about this, but we're coming off of 3 kid-oriented films in a row for Miyazaki, and we go straight into one of his most adult fare here with an adult main character aimed at more of an adult audience. I definitely don't think Porco's just okay. I think this is a great movie. I think the thing you'll hear often with Porco Rosso, I've been responsible for this among many other people, is this is the most underrated Miyazaki movie. Underrated. I think you'll hear this a lot with Porco Rosso. I've definitely been a proponent of calling this the most underrated movie. I think this is right up there with some of his greats, like just behind kind of the big 3 for me. I'm fine with putting this like in the top 5 Miyazaki. I think we did a top 5 podcast a while ago. I think I put this in the top 5. I love Porco Rosso. I have a little bit of a complicated relationship with this movie, which we'll go over, specifically in some of its kind of feminist aspects. I would love to talk that through in a lot of detail.
Yes.
However, this is like unbridled Miyazaki in a lot of ways, and it really shines through. I think it's pretty incredible start to finish. This is like, it's the best display of planes. You got some great characters. It's just really fun. I love the opening scene. It's so fun with the rescuing the happy children. It's another line in of the great Miyazaki opening scenes. I agree. The music's great. I love the ending of this movie. I love the ending credits. There's some really deep flashbacks, and like a big component of this movie, something I was focusing on preparing for this podcast, is the kind of the overt political themes and perspective of this movie. I think that it is refreshing to see Miyazaki kind of just go whole hog, there you go, with his political mindset. As I was constructing that sentence in my head, I realized I had to say that. This is Miyazaki, better to be a pig than a fascist. This is totally Miyazaki's kind of left-wing political mindset shining through the most that you'll see in any of his films. And I think in a certain aspect, I think that's maybe the most special part of this movie is, and the fact that it's grounded in reality in a way that others aren't, I think really, encourages that and, allows for that type of perspective. So I think this is a special movie. I think it's also just a really unique movie compared to other Miyazaki movies. Well, the closest thing to this is probably Wind Rises, which we'll talk about in like months. Even, I think it's different from that movie, and it's like very different from the movies we've been talking about previously and the ones we'll talk about next. So, that's probably where I want to start. I mean, I think just at its core, this is like, I'll be referencing Miyazakiworld by Susan Napier as always throughout the series. She kind of starts her chapter on this by comparing this movie to Casablanca. So it's like a Casablanca-esque Miyazaki version of that movie, like maybe a 480s or a golden era, like Hollywood style film. And that's like kind of crazy that there's a Miyazaki version of all of that. That's a part of the reason why I wanted April on this one, just because she is a film person perspective on it. I don't know, April, do you have like thoughts on this, how this movie functions as like a Miyazaki version of an old Hollywood style film?
I can see it fitting into. I was like, whenever I was looking over like your outline and the 40s Casablanca-esque, like, yeah, I can kind of see that. Like, that I think it's a good like comparison. So, and I do agree that it's like a very Hollywood style like war. Like, I would say it's more like Hollywood style wartime versus like Casablanca-esque. So, because it's kind of like, it's like definitely like coming out of the war, and I love like all of like the war talk that takes place between the characters as well. Like, oh, I was a World War I fighter, like X, Y, and Z. And obviously there's the whole scene where he talks about surviving that one battle. But yeah, like,
How does it function for you as like an entry kind of in this like old Hollywood style?
I think it functions very well. Like, I would say that like this would make you appreciate like, I guess I'm going to say actual like Casablanca and things like movies like that sort of style. Just because like, yeah, it's animated, but it is still more adult and it's still a lot of fun. So I think it would be like a good entry into like that part of film history for sure.
Yeah, I feel like that's not like a type of movie that I'm personally, I particularly feel like if I was going to watch a movie, I'd want to watch like a super old movie. I like not really, but this movie kind of makes you want to, like, if anything, like this, it seems so fun, and like the tone of it, like I totally feel like you get into more of those type of movies from this.
I think the other thing too is that like the story itself is interesting, and it's not necessarily like you're not focusing on a love story or like anything else. Like it's kind of just an interesting like this is the other world of it kind of thing. So
well, yeah. I would say that actually like at least to me, what gives off the old Hollywood vibe primarily is kind of the strained relationship between Porco and Gina.
Yeah.
And so like, well, it's not like an overt love story, but it does feel like a kind of like old Hollywood, like we're not allowed to show them being intimate, like physically. So we have to show them like having conversations alone in rooms and like being wistful about each other. So like in that sense, like at least to me, like that feels like a big big piece of this movie, and one of my preferred parts is like seeing their back and forth throughout, and like down to like the at the ending of the movie is like kind of like that's like the last carrot that they dangle at you is like, how does that end? And so like I think that's a big piece of it. Also, I want to say, like, the comparing this to older Hollywood is interesting because, again, we have to remember this is Miyazaki. This is like one of the most colorful animators that exist. And so like putting something that like in your head like you've only seen as like black and white movies for the most part, like in this like vibrant environment, it's like it's a twist that it's a combination that fits very well because of like how it's handled, and like at the same time like there's the fantasy elements as well of, you know, the pig man as well as like a lot of like the facial stuff and the stuff that you can do with animation. So like it does work on that old framework, but I think that what makes this movie like feel special is the fact that you're able to apply like this vibrance that you don't usually associate with the older films.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That a lot of its appeal, I think, comes from it being a fluid, colorful animated movie version of that type of film. And I agree that kind of the Porco Gina undercurrent through the movie is probably the best Casablanca comparison. I think that's kind of what you focus on the chapter. But yeah, it is kind of, for me, it is kind of only an undercurrent because I do think Fio kind of takes center stage for most of the movie with Porco. So it is interesting how he handles. I mean, it's very Miyazakian in that he's not going to focus on romance. So there is kind of this core romantic through line in the movie, but it's really not something that we dive a ton into. We can talk more about that. But yeah, just like Miyazaki's spin on this, like that's kind of my first topic. I feel like I want to get into a ton is just like how Miyazaki, like how this is like the most Miyazaki movie, how this plays into the time period of his life right now, or like when he's making this movie. And I want to start with a quote, definitely the best quote, I think, from the Susan Napier Miyazakiworld chapter. She says, "One can imagine many directors might want to create a post-World War I romance about a war-weary aviator and a beautiful chanteuse. Such a movie plays into our notions of a gold time that we are now locked away from, lost in the detritus of too many subsequent brutal wars and the more subtle brutalities of modernization. Few directors, however, would make that aviator a bounty hunter with a hideout in the Adriatic who entrusts a team of Milanese women, ranging from grandmothers to teenage girls, to rebuild his beloved plane. And no other director that I can imagine would make that aviator a pig in exile. Furthermore, this is not simply any person aviator, but a former human flying ace that at one point tells an old comrade, 'I'd rather be a pig than a fascist,' suggesting that his exile is not only spatial but ideological. And finally, this is an anti-fascist pig who loves a woman whose signature song, Les Temps de Charisse, comes out of the 1871 utopian socialist uprising known as the Paris Commune." This is a great summary of all of the very only Miyazaki aspects of this movie. It's a pig. It's is in this former bounty hunter in the Adriatic, but like there's the most feminist, I think, Miyazakian type scene is like when all the women work in the factory to the workshop to kind of remake his plane. And then referring to the fact that Gina in the beginning is singing a song that a real old French song that's talking about the socialist Paris Commune, which again I think plays into a lot of socialist themes that Miyazaki has woven throughout his movies. So in general, in a lot of ways, this is just like such Miyazaki. All these elements. I mean, I think the fact that the main character is a pig, on top of everything else, is it's something you want to talk about too right away. But it's like, so I'm almost distracted by that. But we can get into some of the other parts of. I'll bring in another Susan Napier quote right away here. She says, like it's part human, part pig hero, this movie is a hybrid, an enthralling adventure that is also a unique commentary on political and moral commitment, middle age, masculinity, and desire. It is also in many ways the most naked expression of Miyazaki's own longing for a different life, a life of action, freedom, and intense moral significance. One that was far away from the constant work and pressures of the director's normal existence. Its gorgeous animation and fantastic plot can be seen as a kind of therapeutic processing of the traumas of middle age. I think you could paint this movie as kind of Miyazaki's midlife crisis, is kind of the summary of. This is like, what she's saying there is like, this is like what Miyazaki would want to be. It's kind of like his wish fulfillment with Porco. He represents Miyazaki's moral and political stances. He's taking action on things. Even with his interaction with kind of these two basic archetypes of women that we see in Miyazaki's films, in Fio and Gina. I think that's an important context to kind of keep in mind, is this being like very much a movie Miyazaki would make at this point of his life. I think he's around 50 or something at making this movie. And like this as unbridled Miyazaki, and also as his kind of wish fulfillment. And then there's another aspect that like we can bring in after that, which kind of like crafts the context for why he made the specific movie. But Alex, any thoughts on that as someone going through Miyazaki's kind of catalog recently for the first time? Does this feel like the most Miyazaki, and how about this as like his wish fulfillment?
Well, two thoughts. First, like you've mentioned a lot about like the politics of this movie. I find interesting that when I was watching, again, like remember, the only knowledge I had about this movie was the one line referencing the fascism. So I was going in being like, okay, this is going to be a very political movie. So perhaps because of that expectation, I was kind of surprised that like it's not actually that. At least when I was watching it, there doesn't seem to actually be that much overt commentary. It's mentioned in like the backdrop or in like conversations that don't really affect the story. Like he's talking to the storekeeper a little bit about the government, but like you could like blink and that scene goes and it doesn't really affect anything. So like I would say that while the politics is there, it feels very much like more of a backdrop than the focus of the movie, which I think is actually it's how it's supposed to be. Like it's supposed to just be like as like more of a table setting than anything else.
I agree. But like
it's
a backdrop as opposed to the main plot. Yeah.
Right. So like with that said, at least to me, like the main thing that I got out of Porco Rosso is like the sense of individualism, the sense of like wanting to do things on your own, like you don't need help from anybody else, and like needing to like cede to other people when they offer their help. So like for example, like we're talking about like the woman coming in, like a bit. One of the stuff that I would agree is feminist about this is Porco like slowly coming to terms with the fact like, okay, I guess I can let women help, like they're actually capable of doing stuff. And like you see his, it's admittedly quick, but you see his biases being broken down as he like sees them in action. And of course, the Fio, of course, she proves herself, especially in the second half of the movie. So like that's my sense, and I guess you could apply it to Miyazaki as like a person who like wants to do everything on his own, but like eventually he has this studio where he has to handle like other people doing their own projects, and like realizing that's going to help the whole industry if he allows people to help him out. So like I guess in that sense. But yeah, just like Porco, I enjoyed seeing like the stubbornness, and that's something that doesn't even like go. What I enjoy is that like his character doesn't change that much throughout, because by the end, like he's still kind of a stubborn pig man. But like at the very least, like he's allowed people in like when he needs the help, and people that he wouldn't immediately have gone to, but because they prove themselves, he's willing to let them in, and you get that like scene where he even like talks to Fio a little bit about his past, something which seems like he doesn't do with many people. So like so I enjoyed Porco's character, and I think that that's what resonated with me the most in terms of like the main point of the story is to like see how he slowly but surely gets his worldview changed and gains a little bit of faith in humanity over time.
Yeah, I think that's a valid hypothesis on how Miyazaki's own life might relate to this character. I know for sure that the all the women in the factory that the workshop that help him make the plane are probably a tribute to all the female animators at Studio Ghibli, and kind of like it through his experience with seeing everyone help make his movie. So I think like his experiences in Ghibli are definitely crafting. I mean, and I think I said in the beginning that's crafting the context for this movie. And how he's very like worn out by this point, and that's kind of a backdrop to his perspective in making the movie. April, any comments on like what Alex talked about, or this is like a representation of these core Miyazaki elements?
Wow, you guys covered so much.
We're bouncing around a lot of topics right now. We are.
No, I definitely agree with Alex that I think like all of the politics of this movie are very like they're very much like an undertone, and they're not really like because I think that's the other thing is that everyone's like oh because they like their core relation is that that line, and so but like again when you watch the movie like I never even like thought of like those. Like it being political ever in any of my times watching it. So I think that's a really interesting perspective. But
yeah, well, we can dive into this a little bit. I mean, political in the sense that it's against the rise of fascism in 30s, 40s, like something we would all be against at this point. But I think he would relate it to current conflicts, which we can talk about in a second. But my biggest argument against the political perspective of the movie only being a backdrop, although I agree it's generally that because he wants to create a fun movie at the core, and I don't think he's trying to create a political drama. But there's the scene when they're done with the factory. Porco and Fio escape from the Italian fascist police trying to chase them down. So like there is like the anti-fascist, like that is like a component of the plot, and then there's the Italian Air Force is coming to them at the end, and that's all kind of under the growing rise of fascism in power in Italy at the time. It's definitely an influence on the plot, but like it's more, the focus is definitely more concerned on Porco's personal journey and kind of what's going on with his conflict with Curtis. There is the better a pig than a fascist is how it's translated in the official subtitles, but the other quote is works better, I think. And then you do get this line, I think Alex mentioned when he's talking to the one of the shopkeepers, war profiteers are villains, bounty hunters are just stupid. The guy talking to his son after Porco, I think, buys ammo or something from them.
Oh yeah, the store.
Yeah, so like there's you get this this
you get, like, small jabs.
I think it's like what's most striking, I would say, is that a real life history, political history is the backdrop for this movie. Like the actual locations, and this relates to the setting of the movie, the actual locations I think are like kind of fictional, although there's clear parallels between real islands and kind of the islands that they're all on. And so the setting of this movie, I think, bounces from modern, like Italian Croatia, I would say the Adriatic Sea kind of separating them. But just like a actual real life historical context to what's going on, I think provides power and, potency to the messages of lines like this. And I think there is kind of enough of it, that it does shine through some context on the time when Miyazaki's making this movie in 1992 and why he maybe ends up making this movie versus some other ones. So we got to get into briefly some conflicts in the world at the time, starting. Yes.
Well, just before you dive into it, just a brief comment on the settings. I do want to point out, like, a lot of times this reminded me of the settings of like Kiki's Delivery Service and Castle Cagliostro. Like, there's a lot of similarity in the vibe of that. The main difference is you're using like Milan, like you're using the names of real life places. But I would say that, like, I think this is just a difference of opinion. I don't think that there's much added in terms, at least in terms of the setting, like the effect of like putting you in that time and place. He has really down the general European old style vibe, and I think that comes across whether you name it Milan or you name it whatever, like some other fake name. Like I think that comes across all the same. The main thing is the time period, like you're saying World War, like that itself, like does have an effect.
We're talking about World War I experiences. Yeah, I would say that's mainly what I'm saying. I also do think it's the type of thing that'll shine through more upon multiple subsequent rewatches. You know, it's the type of thing where I'm watching this movie for the sixth time. I'm gonna like focus more on these more subtle things at this point. So I definitely like the core of the movie. I think will shine through for the most part on like most viewings. I definitely think so. So get it some context. I think like another aspect, getting into like Miyazaki's perspective making this movie, and we seem to want to go to other topics because this is like not a lot of like discussion to get into. But I want to like note like very much his disillusionment with the world shapes this movie, which is interesting because I do think there's a lot of positivity portrayed in the movie.
But also like Porco himself is very disillusioned with the world
yes,
as well.
Maybe through his eyes.
Why he's like maintaining his independence. He doesn't want to join the Air Force or the pirates or anything. Like he doesn't agree with anybody's ideology. He's just like, I just want to live my life and like not be bothered by any of this.
Yeah. I think that's a good argument in favor of Porco being kind of this Miyazaki stand-in character. Here's a quote from Susan. Well, these are quotes from Miyazaki quoted in the Susan Napier chapter. So Miyazaki says, we felt the world was getting better bit by bit. Our history was that things would get better. So when Yugoslavian ethnic wars happened, we were dumbfounded. What was going on? Were we just going backwards? These last 2 years since 1992, I've really been running around in a haze. He also says, I used to fight constantly with my mother when I was an adolescent about whether people are stupid or not. My mother's cherished opinion was that people were hopeless. I always disagreed, but lately it's unconditional surrender. So him very done with humanity from that quote, seems like. Another context is the Gulf War also happening around this time. Susan Napier says, Japan's involvement in the Gulf War, while hesitant and piecemeal, seemed to Miyazaki and many others on the left to be a betrayal of the country's pacifist constitution. The high-tech nature of the war and the fact that the scenes of carnage were rarely shown in the media also greatly disturbed the director. In fact, he went so far as to state that after Kiki, he had been planning a film about young love set in modern Tokyo, but had abandoned that idea. As the critic Koji Okuda puts it, in a world of blood, Miyazaki could not make a movie about youth.
I disagree.
I mean, I think not soon after he is a big component of Whisper of the Heart, so that movie I think will get made soon. This is I think this is going to be relevant getting into Wind Rises later on too. So I think there's probably a lot of parallels between the two. But Miyazaki upset at world events and like humanity, and so like maybe channels into the character of Porco, maybe why he's making a film kind of set with more political tones. As we've talked about, it's more of a backdrop, but for Miyazaki, this is like way more than we usually see, I think, and we'll see from other films.
This is like him being blunt,
yeah,
but not really.
In this aspect, yeah, I think.
Well, and also like it's important to note we choose an American as the quote, like not really antagonist, because like it's not like he's like doing necessarily evil stuff.
I think he's the villain of the movie.
Yeah, like he's the person who's opposing Porco in this, and like the Gulf War was mostly American stuff. Also, I'm aware of that time that he didn't show up to the Oscars because he was angry at the U.S. for being involved in Iraq. So, like, this is like also like I in addition to being generally anti-war, like which has come out like since Nausicaa, but like also like it does feel like specifically American involvement is annoying to him, and even in this movie, like the American is kind of portrayed as like kind of like over the top pompous, and like that's a reputation that's been gained over the years, but it shows that specifically is kind of like rubbing the wrong way, as it does with many people, I'm sure, around the world.
Yeah, I can throw it, since we're talking about this, I can throw in the Napier quote on Curtis. Miyazaki had also been shaken by the first Gulf War. It's surely no accident the villain in Porco Rosso is Curtis, a bumptious young American who is equal parts arrogance and ignorance, although Miyazaki possibly tried to counterbalance that by making Fio, his secondary female character, a charming young girl, recently returned from America. Yeah, I think we've been talking about the setting, and we can kind of conclude talking about Europe, kind of how it ties into this, because this is another entry in Miyazaki's Europe movies, which I would say like a majority of his movies have been set in Europe at this point. They're always either Europe or Japan. Notably, you're right, like not America. It's always Europe. He has a Europe. He's like a Europe file.
He loves it.
Not like America, and so I don't think he I would say, I don't know if Miyazaki is like a bias against America. I think it's just like America's the one doing all these terrible things throughout when he's making these movies.
If you're anti-war, then by extension, you kind of
have to be against these actions America's taking. Yeah, I think so. But Kurt, I mean, is there another American character in a Miyazaki movie? I'm struggling to think of one like Curtis overtly from America.
You have to narrow it down. What other movies are taking place in the quote real world? With that, like even that's like very few of them.
Right, but I mean, you could call it like Kiki, not set in the real world, but there's all these European characters, and we know by extension it's kind of Sweden. But so you're right, there wouldn't be like a parallel for that, but
I vaguely remember in Cagliostro, like there's that United Nations scene where the American is squabbling with the Russians.
That's another movie that kind of takes place in the real world, kind of. But the United Nations, there's probably like an American representative. But just this movie as like a very much pure like representation of Miyazaki's obsession with Europe. Another entry into there. Kind of briefly, not super related to this movie specifically, but I thought this was as good of a time to mention it as any, is that we mentioned that basically every one of Miyazaki's movies takes place in either Japan or Europe. There's not a lot of different race representation in these Miyazaki movies. And I think it's worth noting, the core explanation would be that a lot of his movies take place in Japan or in like specific locations in Europe. However, there are Black people in Japan. There are, Latinx people in Japan, and they don't seem to make their way into Miyazaki movies ever. So I think we kind of talk about Miyazaki as this like amazing feminist director historically. Definitely don't think that translates to race in his movies. I mean, I think for sure you need to keep in mind the contextual differences between America and the rest of the world talking about race. It's kind of different, and we don't have like the Japan perspective on anything. But we kind of just see two types of people in Miyazaki movies: Japanese people, European people. It doesn't really translate into anything else.
And I'd say that's a general fault of just the fantasy genre for many years, where like even though like it's a totally different place, but like it's also been portrayed as whitewashed for so many years that just has become the default. And that's not something that we should continue to perpetrate. But like examples like the Miyazaki filmography is like part of, like, it's a big piece of the fantasy canon. And that just like, if that's what you imagine when you think of fantasy movie, then that ends up leaking into future stuff. And so that is something to point out as well. Like, just these are totally different environments, but that shouldn't mean that they all look the same.
Yeah, and I think it's true of fantasy movies, but, I think that maybe why I mention it in this movie is, this movie's maybe not limited by these types of obscuring factors like that, like there could have just been a Black person in this movie, and there's just not. Like there like could have just, there are different different types of people around in this time period. I mean, surely not as much as current, I guess, but you could have had portrayed more different types of people, considering this is kind of the real world. So I think it's definitely worth mentioning throughout. And I don't, I agree that it's like, oh, this is a problem of all fantasy films. I think I hold Miyazaki to the above, like, not to any standards of archetypal anything. Like it's Miyazaki. This is the end of the line. So like we're gonna talk about him on his own in this respect. And I don't know. We'll see. I'll track throughout I don't specifically, or maybe I'm forgetting certain characters through the rest of the Ghibli canon. So we can kind of keep this in mind as we go. And if we see any other representations of different types of people, we can talk about it. But yeah, I mean, I talked about that in the context of this being Europe. April, any other comments on like kind of this is Miyazaki's like idealized or like his Europe fantasy and stuff? Maybe like we saw that in Kiki as well. We talked about it there. How do you think it compares to kind of his portrayal of Europe in Kiki? Similar?
Yeah, I would say that it's very similar, especially when we actually, I guess, are interacting with the rest of the world. I know we spend a lot of time in the air and in his little hideout, but I definitely like see this like all of, especially because he does call out like Milan and places like that. So it's very similar, very European. He loves Europe so much.
Yeah, and I feel like for this movie, for me, like the fact that it is kind of grounded in reality more, that like shine. This would be my Miyazaki Europe movie if I had to choose one. Honestly, Cagliostro too, like just the castle, but this is what I think of when I think of Miyazaki in Europe. And it is like a really
because
gorgeous
it does take
display.
place in Europe.
Yeah, it's literally is in Europe. Yeah,
literally in Europe.
Yeah. I think we've mostly talked about the politics. I mean, also there's like the Depression as a backdrop, the Great Depression as a backdrop to everything that's happening too. That's kind of mentioned a few times in the movie, notable as well. Let's talk about him as a pig. We think we brought this
you don't
up.
want to continue the serious conversation with like feminism stuff. We'll just go to pig. Okay,
let's talk about the pig in the middle of this. Yeah. Alex, first time you watched this movie, what is your explanation for why Marco turned into a pig based on watching the movie?
Good question. See, what I found very interesting about this movie is that even though it's a pig man, we mentioned it's a curse, then we don't really come back to that for almost the entire movie until like near the end with like Theo like kissing him. But like just like him being a pig doesn't really like affect anything. Like almost nobody like comments on it except to like make pig puns. But like nobody like treats him differently.
So why is he a pig then if it doesn't affect the movie?
Because it's fun. Like,
you gotta make it exciting for people.
Yeah, and also like it also like plays into like the individualism of the character. Like he doesn't feel like doing anything that anybody else wants him to do. He doesn't want to join the Air Force. He doesn't want to be a part of a group. He just wants to do his own thing, be a bounty hunter. And so like being a totally different and like not even being a human is like pushing that to the full limit there. And at the same time, like the part to me that feels weird is that we do kind of couch it in this like, is it a spell? And like we have like the whole kissing thing. So like it also feels like a way of making it feel more fairy tale-y, which I'm honestly not that into. Like I kind of just enjoy the fact that he's a pig and we don't even explain it. Like that'd be just fine with me. But like so I prefer that it doesn't have much of an explanation. I just like weird movies, and like this makes it feel fantastical a lot in spite of its grounded realistic setting that we spent like half an hour talking about. Like just him being a pig, like that's a good time. And like he has those like the dark sunglasses all the time, hiding his little beady eyes, and he got his pig snout, and it's great. You love
pigs then. You did see a pig in person once.
Yeah,
you have seen a pig in person.
I like shows with talking animals. That's just a
lot of modern animation.
I like. Yeah. So like this fits right in there. But yeah. So like I enjoy the pig stuff. I don't think they do that much with like there is symbolism there, but it's very light. And I'll say that I'm not that much of a fan of like the whole like spell stuff that we like briefly touch on.
Well, good thing it's like barely in the movie then. It's like
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I like your point about how this like you were talking about how grounded this movie is in reality, and then the main character's a pig, so it's kind of a fun contrast. Yeah. That at its core, maybe that's why
it just mixes it up a little bit. You know.
Yeah, April. How about these two questions? So, like,
Okay.
why is in the context of the movie? What's your reason? What's your read on the plot as to why he's a pig? And then also, like, why did Miyazaki just make him a pig? Like, in a meta sense.
So, okay. Wow. There's a lot of like thoughts racing through my head. So
give us all of them.
Okay, so I like that he's just a pig, and I think it's funny that like, well, so because it's like a realistic setting, and then everyone's just like accepted the fact that he's a pig. Like, this is something that happens every day. Well, I mean, not every day, because they do, say like, oh, it's the pig pilot and stuff like that. But I like that it exists. I think it's like funny because they're like, oh, it's a curse or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess, like, whatever. And we just move on with our day. So I really like that aspect. If I had to like try and put context or give it a reason why he was turned into a pig, you could say that like it's because it acts like a pig towards women. And I'm like, to get into like because he is a little bit well, he's not a little bit, he is very sexist towards women, and has a lot of comments about their capabilities and like their place in the world kind of situation. So maybe it's like one of those like, oh, well, because you can't respect women, you're going to be a pig. And that's why like he like feels like, oh, well, maybe if I give you a kiss on the cheek or something. And it's like, no, it's not that kind of curse. Like, it's not about finding love. It's about like me as an individual kind of thing. So, but I guess it like also gives it like that fantasy aspect as well, because again, we're like in a real world setting. We're talking about like there's undertones of real world like events that have taken place that are going on in the world, and so it just kind of makes it lighthearted at that point too. And who doesn't love a grumpy pig?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Alex is on board with the grumpy pig. But if I had to like say why, I would say that it's probably because of like his attitude towards women and to like his like views on the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. Specifically, he's like a sexist pig, like literally. That's interesting.
Literally.
Yeah, I'd say I agree with the idea of it be like also being a extension of just general stubbornness. Maybe not like directly him being piggish towards women, although that is the case. But like more like that's an extension of just like his entire personality of like being like doubtful of anybody being capable of doing anything. Also, but I would say with regards to women, it is noticeable that the times we see him as a man is in that picture with Gina from the past, as well as we get that flashback of him flying the plane with like Gina when they're kids. So like I think that another possible interpretation is as well like him drifting apart from Gina over the years, and he's gone so far off emotionally that he's become this pig. And so like the day he becomes a human will coincide with the day that he finally decides to go engage again with Gina. So like it's just the few times that we get of him as a human, I think that also would contribute to any case you make of why he's a pig in the first place.
Okay, it's another good one. Maybe as him being a pig representative of his distance from Gina, something like that. So I've always kind of bought the in-universe explanation of, so the only time, I think this is the one line, is Gina, when they're having dinner towards the beginning of the movie, says, "I wish I could release you from that spell."
Right.
And I think that's literally it. I mean, Theo speculates that maybe if I kiss you, I'll break the curse, but it's like, clearly he didn't tell her anything factual about that. Like she's just kind of speculating. So I always in my head, it was always like, okay, it was a curse by a witch at some point in the past, and that's it. We don't talk about it. But upon rewatch here, it might not be that. And these symbolic explanations, I think, are actually valid. Susan Napier, she says, We never really do find out what transforms Marco into Porco. We assume it's some kind of magical manifestation of survivor's guilt, combined with Marco's contempt for a human race that can produce a fascist ideology and a war that sacrifices thousands of young men for nothing. But we are never told so explicitly. So this is her explanation is,
well, that's kind of like a combination of the stuff that we said, right?
Yeah, I mean, just a very, like, broadly, his views on the world, kind of like, it's a manifestation of that.
I'd say another thing that goes against the spell interpretation is that there is a moment before the kiss happens where Fio like looks up while she's like sleeping and she sees Porco, but in man form for a brief second before like she gets noticed and then he turns back into pig. But like the point, like the fact that that's happening in like a relaxed setting and like he is preparing for something. So like I don't know if that contributes to anything, but just the fact that it happens before, the kiss, like kind of like detracts from the possibility that was actually what fits anything.
Maybe it's like a glamour, and that's
just like Game of Thrones situation.
No, like maybe, but maybe he doesn't actually look like a pig. That's just how everyone else sees him.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. Like, I think you can interpret that Fio scene as just like that's her seeing something like in her own head, and it's not literal. I think that's possible.
Yeah.
In terms of like why Miyazaki did this, I think like the obvious explanation, if you look into the history of the movie, is he had a manga with a bunch of pigs as characters, and he adapted one of them into a movie, so he kept that aspect.
Yeah,
so it's just like he could have changed it though, and they made a major feature, and he kept that really weird aspect. And he's been asked a lot of times, why is this? This is probably one of his most common questions, like why is this a pig? Miyazaki does not answer things straight, so we really don't get a good explanation from him. I think a lot of his default answer is kind of just it's fun, like that is kind of what he says.
Exactly, and that's my thing with like in general with like animal stuff. Like if you listen to this podcast before, we've had this discussion with Dylan about shows like Amphibia. Like there's the thing of like why are they frogs? But there doesn't have to be an explanation. Like just animal people are fun, and like we can explore like the different attributes of nature and like how anthropomorphized stuff we can get. I will say though, lots of missed opportunities with pig. I mean, well, maybe not missed opportunities, but they have a lot of restraint in terms of like there's not actually that much like pig jokes. Like he doesn't wink.
There's a few pig
like
jokes.
There's
some, but
there's
not
like puns, right? Or like wordplay, but like there's no like oinking. There's no like tail stuff. Like they don't actually do anything with like the pig body per se. It's so in that sense that they actually kind of restrain themselves in terms of like it's a pig, but we're not really going to talk about him being a pig.
It's restrained, yeah. So I think for the most part, like Miyazaki would say, it's fun. There's this brief interpretation in the Napier chapter. Porco Rosso means red pig in the translation. Yeah, red communist. It's like so, Miyazaki kind of has these socialist communist beliefs. At one point he is an aside, like in making the film, all this disillusionment and regret piled up. I had the feeling I will be the last red, and the vision became that of a single pig flying alone. Not clear if he's joking, but there's a potential explanation for him being the last communist.
Also he was a war pig, so he had the blood of his fellow soldiers.
Okay. Yeah, but the end. And here's the last aspect the pig on discusses. At the end, Curtis is like, "Wait, let me see your face."
Right, and that's after Fio kisses.
After Fio kisses him, what happened?
Nothing. He's still a pig.
Is he still a pig? Like, if I read the Wikipedia summary and it said, Curtis, much like Fio, sees him briefly as a pig. I always interpreted this ending.
We don't see that, though.
I always interpreted this ending as he changed back fully. I think I think he's not a pig anymore at the end of the movie.
I think the problem is that I heard the dub does this differently, but the sub leaves it ambiguous at the end of like
it's definitely ambiguous.
If he's come back and stuff. So like I think that the point is to be ambiguous. So like I'm not sure that like him turning back fully would make sense with what happens after. So we don't see him. So like how would anyone know?
Yeah, April, does he turn back?
I I like to believe that he doesn't turn back.
What? Okay.
Yeah, because like I don't know. I think like the whole point of it, like leaving it ambiguous and everything, is to kind of give like that sense of hope at the end of the movie. You know, like, oh, well, like if Porco can become Marco again, like anything can happen when pigs fly. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah, no pigs fly joke. I guess that's an English.
No,
thing,
he did say he had to go fly at one point.
Yeah,
He's
that
like,
was there.
this pig has to fly, and I was like,
Who knows how that works in Japanese, though? Honestly,
But
that must be like a universal metaphor, though.
yeah, I feel like that's a universal thing.
Someone who speaks
Also,
Japanese
maybe
can
this
tell
is
us.
just like Miyazaki being a huge troll, making him a pig. He's like, haha, that pig's flying. Like,
I mean, he's definitely a big troll, so I think like him making Porco a pig and then not really saying why, I think is his troll move.
but I mean, I don't know. I think that Curtis like has like a brief moment, like Theo did, and sees him as a human. And so, which could, you could interpret it as, being symbolic as them accepting Porco as who he is, or something along those lines. But I mean, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things like, does it really like matter? Because we didn't really care that he was a pig for the entirety of the movie.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah, I mean, I think you could interpret it as Theo kisses him on the cheek before, and it doesn't turn him back. But this is like a kiss on the lips. I like, for me, there's like a difference there, but maybe there isn't, like in the turning someone back from a thing, and maybe just and probably it's not the kiss that would turn him back anyway. It's kind of this release of internal whatever's going on with the end of the climax of the movie. If you buy into this, it's a manifestation of his internal being. That's kind of the reason he's a pig. I think he turns back. But let's talk about the rest of the ending, because it is ambiguous, and that is the ultimate point, is it's ambiguous. Theo at the end narrates about everyone's future. I think, as we're seeing a few times, Miyazaki gives epilogues to all of his movies, basically. Which I think in modern times, epilogues are kind of seen as like weak sauce narrative, but here's the master, and he does have epilogues, so I hope people can note that. But usually it happens in the credits, but for this movie, the credits are like very like serious, and I love them. Like, they really fit the movie, I think. But so like we have the kind of epilogue stuff like right before that. She says she like Porco like forces her to leave with Gina, and she says she never sees Porco again, and but she is like friends with Gina, and like Curtis is a Hollywood star, and she runs the workshop, and she visits the hotel every summer. I don't know how to piece all these things together with her never seeing Marco. Consider it like there's them.
She said she never saw Porco again, so maybe she just saw
Marco, not Porco.
As Marco. Yeah,
it's interesting. But she also kind of like, and then she's like, did Gina and Marco end up together? Like, that's a secret, So, but if they did, then she'd see him if she was visiting the hotel every summer, I feel like.
Unless he's hiding in the basement.
Yeah. I mean, I think like this can tie into our discussion on feminism as our last major topic too, which, this to me, him putting, Theo in the boat and like never seeing her again is his Cagliostro Clarice moment, where he doesn't like Clarice like wants to be with him and he says no and leaves. Like he's exploring this older male protagonist, like with a like a child having feelings for them, but like at the end doesn't go through with it, kind of subverting what kind of more gross type of like these types of movies will do at the end. So I see that very similarly. But I think it's and you could argue that that's kind of a feminist ending to this. Like Marco's never really expressing any sort of interest in Theo, and I know I keep switching back and forth between Marco and Porco.
So does Theo. Theo switches back.
There you go.
Gina.
Well, Gina didn't Gina always call him Marco though?
I think
Yeah,
probably. Yeah, but she knew him when he was, Marco. I don't know. Why does he need to change his name to Porco when he becomes a pig? I feel like just keep your name.
No, Porco's cuter.
Yeah, you gotta lean into it.
Lean into it?
Yes.
Yeah, I guess that's how you avoid being bullied. Yeah.
Pig, come on now.
Especially if you're a bounty hunter, you gotta have a catchy name.
That's true. I think it's probably his bounty hunter name, yeah.
Porco Rosso.
Yeah, so Fio, like I struggle with Fio in this movie. I mean, Fio's great. I think she's a great character. But the difference between a Kiki, which is from the perspective of Kiki, and like most of his movies are from the perspective of the young heroine, this movie takes on the perspective of the middle-aged man, Porco. And as I've kind of alluded to with these Susan Napier quotes, I think there is an element of desire permeating this portrayal of Fio, even if the relationship is never inappropriate, even if she's never really sexualized by the movie. She's like this idealized like young girl, whether it like weeds into in a romantic or sexual sense or not. It's just like this view of her from this male perspective. And I think like it at the very least is very different from his other perspectives of female heroes. And you complicate that with Fio like liking Porco. And like I said, it is very similar to Clarice and in Cagliostro with the hero. But to me, this is more questionable. Alex, we talked about that movie, but I feel like this movie, maybe it's because it does more with it. Maybe it's because Fio's more of a component of the movie. I don't know. It weeds more into this murky territory for me.
Right. And also, I begin bringing up the seaplane people here because like their relationship to Fia is very similar to like the Sky Pirates and Castle in the Sky.
Yes,
and,
that's the comparison I was going to make too.
Yeah, and so like even there, it felt a bit weird to me, and like this feels like the extension of it, where like there's this like fascination with like ooh a girl, but like that's kind of their only thing throughout the movie, and like the thing is, I enjoy Porco as a main character, but because of that, like the stuff with Fio feels like there's like parts that work okay, like when they're flying to get gas, and they're talking about like you gotta understand their situation and stuff, and they have banter. So like that's all fine and all, but then like when it gets to like more of Fio's fascination specifically to Porco or Marco, like that part does feel a bit off, and so like I'd agree. I enjoy Fio as a character, but at the same time, I don't think that she's as strong of a character as previous Miyazaki female leads, on the basis of like her being treated more like a side character in this movie. So I like her. She has her moments, but stuff with her does feel a bit weaker than in other movies.
And it should be noted, we mentioned Fio kisses him on the cheek, and then at the end does kiss him. And again, this is Fio's representation of her feelings, and Porco's not indulging in that. And the fact at the end he actively distances himself from her, which of course.
And the thing is that it happens from Fio's even introduction as a character, because like the very first thing we see is like her showing up, and then the dad being like, "Hey, hands off." So it's like that's kind of like hanging over their interaction for the entire movie, because that's how you're introduced there. It's like, okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That is kind of an introduction. April, how do you see Fio?
So Fio is okay. So immediately I want to say that she's portrayed completely in the opposite light as our previous female leads, such as Kiki and so on and so forth. But again, that it is because those movies that come from the female perspective. And it feels like, in comparison to this, it feels like it's an idealized like version. Like it would be incredible if like a man would just like, and again at this time and everything, like it would be such a high compliment for a man to be like, and I'm just gonna use Kiki as an example, But what's his face? He praises her all the time. Like, he's so fascinated with her like ability to function, and especially because she's a witch. But then we have like Theo, and like she is very capable. She's good at what she does, but yet she doesn't like get that like praise or recognition. I mean, she gets it from her grandpa, but it's very much like it's because she's his granddaughter versus like just being a capable mechanic and like aircraft designer. So which is why like I don't like the whole like Theo like if she even really develops feelings for Porco. Maybe she's, you know, obviously she's fascinated with him because of his, you know, his claim to fame in the aviation world or in this fantasy world. But I get to bring up why the dub is more problematic for me than the sub is because in the dub, like, man, Porco's laying it on thick, and they're really driving home the fact that, like, you can't be with this woman, like, you know, like, and he's like, with this cute girl, you know, and says all of these, like, like, I guess they're, like, supposed to be nice, but they're kind of derogatory, especially whenever he keeps calling her a cute girl, and I'm like, can you stop? Like, stop calling her a cute girl. Like, she's a capable woman. She's out here making planes. So, but in the sub, you kind of get that, but you don't get it as heavy as it is in the dub.
Yeah, I think he does call her that at least once in the sub. For me, in like Japanese, that's more of a normal thing to say, like cute girl. But yeah, in English, that I think that comes across in a different way.
Yeah, in English, it definitely comes across in a different way, and maybe it's just how like Michael Keaton decided to, you know, deliver those lines or whatever. But like it felt more derogatory in the dub versus the sub. So, but even still, like all of, you know. I have such complicated feelings about Thea.
Yeah, because she's great, right? Like she is an amazing, like, if you just look at her as just a character, she's an amazing character. But when you look at her from like Porco's like perspective, like, she has a lot to prove. You know, she is a young girl. You know, she's mildly attractive, I'm assuming. Yeah, and like, especially because he like makes comments about like her complexion and stuff like that. Like, come on, like, can you not? There's more to her than like her nice skin and how she looks. Which he like learns a little bit as the movie goes on, a little bit, and so that's kind of like a plot line.
Yeah, like he learns a little bit, and there's a lot to be said about like Porco just accepting the assistance from women as well, because he, like, whenever, you know, all of the family starts to come, all of the women of the family start to come and like build the plane and everything like that, he's just like, well, why aren't there men? The men are doing other jobs. Okay, well, tell them to come back. And it's like, no, like, if you want your plane fixed, it's going to be fixed by women, like, deal with it, kind of thing. So I guess it's nice that like his friend, I guess, initiates that, but it's never like blatantly said. And again, he still has like issues with like, oh, well, make sure you get sleep at night, Theo. Like, whatever, let her stay up all night and then go fix your plane. Like,
yeah.
And even like the comment, like, okay, it could be like taken that he was trying to be helpful by saying like, oh, if you change it like half a degree or something like that, like, that seems like you're like trying to check her work, kind of like, oh, you think you're good, you should probably adjust that. So it's, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I like, so yeah, no, I think these are great points. For me, there's like two kind of things here, which is one, Porco being just like a sexist character.
Yeah.
I think that is can be okay. I think it is realistic.
And even like in the beginning, like the very beginning where he goes to save, you know, all of those kids, it's not that, oh, this is a job for you to do. He only, especially in the dub, he only gets up after whoever says, oh, there's schoolgirls on the plane that need to be saved. And he's like, okay, I'll go do it. Like,
yeah.
like,
I mean, I think that's
the sub specifically just uses school tour group. So
yeah,
I think it's like that's like displaying he's not interested in helping unless it's like for this altruistic cause. But yeah, like just like the displaying of him as like just a sexist guy. First of all, very unique in kind of Miyazaki's canon. I don't think there's really many displays of sexism in his movies. We can track that as we go, I guess. But you know, I think there's like that, and then there's like just the movie's perspective through the lens of Porco. It's like we're only able to see Theo through Porco and through this movie. And it's not just Porco. It's like, as we've been talking about this movie being kind of the most unbridled Miyazaki, it's kind of like Miyazaki's male gaze onto this character and this movie in general. I think there's like a different way you do it where, you know, you can have like a problematic main character, and show that that's more clearly wrong. But let me bring in the Susan Napier quote. This on this to this kind of like brings up a few things, a few aspects of this I think are relevant. She says, in Porco Rosso's wish-fulfilling male fantasy, Theo and Gina occupy two ends of Miyazaki's dream continuum, the complicated, resourceful, and beautiful older woman, and the cute, vivacious, and also resourceful young girl. Naturally, they both love Marco, and he responds to both of them. Gina's professional accomplishments and Theo's mechanical expertise make them more than simply idealized cardboard cutouts, however. One of the movie's most charming twists is that they become lifelong friends. So there, I think the beginning contains some like comments on the perspective of the movie, which I want to get into, but it should be noted, these are both like really good characters, Theo and Gina, containing like a lot of depth to them. So even in kind of like, you could argue Miyazaki's most male perspective work, the numbers 2 and 3 characters are like pretty well characterized women. And yeah, this thing at the end, this notion that they stay friends forever. It is kind of like, and she never sees the guy again. I think that's a pretty cool ending, a pretty cool take on that. And like I mentioned before, definitely the most overtly feminist aspect of this movie is the scene when all the women come to work on the plane, from grandmothers to like children. That's like incredibly striking. That like feels super Miyazaki, that scene, and it's really good. But I like super agree with what Susan Napier says. Is this is like the wish fulfillment male fantasy. You get like the idealized like young girl and the idealized older woman, and like clearly these characters occupy. There's like archetypes for both of these characters throughout Miyazaki's films, but these are like, for me, this movie is like his perspective kind of finally coming out, because you look at the previous movies and most of his other movies and you're like, how can he be so feminist? Like, it's this old fashioned, like Japanese man of a past era. Like, how are his movies so feminist? That's like, it's really hard to grasp. And I think like, it's not because he's this crazy different person. Like, I think he does have these, you know, he is who he is. Like, you can't like truly like escape from like being from bygone era and learning certain ways. And I feel like that finally comes out in this movie. Like truly, we finally see that this is a part of Miyazaki. And even at his most male perspective-y, this is not like the most sexist movie ever. And it's not even arguably fairly sexist, depending on your perspective on it. But I feel like we're finally seeing his kind of wish fulfillment scenario, like here with Theo and Gina. And, you know, it, in like I've said, speaking to like, to Miyazaki in a positive way, even in this wish fulfillment scenario, he has two powerful, great women as kind of the wish fulfillments. However, it's like here we get to see the perspective of that wish fulfillment, you know. He really keeps it in check almost every other movie, almost every other thing he makes, and he like approaches it the right way from usually young girls' perspectives, or sometimes like slightly older women's perspective. And like he totally is and like, but this movie is, it's finally it like really comes out. And I think there's an argument that like you can't do this movie without being true to that kind of perspective. Like, what is this movie with the sanitized version of this? Like, it's like, if you're gonna do the more sanitized version, you make it from Theo as the main character. You know, like it does feel right to a certain extent, because you know it is Porco and he does kind of suck, and like, so approaching the perspective of this movie from this wish fulfillment perspective, I don't know if it's like right, but it feels like it fits at the very least.
I just say, looping back to where we started on comparing this to like a 40s old Hollywood thing, I think that part of the reason that he's been able to restrain himself from romance for so long is because like for the most part, he's been focused on like a totally different environment, like a story that requires a lot of attention. But putting this in the real world and basing it around like that aesthetic kind of like invites romance, because like that was a big thing of these types of like wartime movies, because you always needed like the male lead in addition to the action stuff to have like some kind of quote anchor, like keeping him grounded to life, and that was always a love interest. So like because of we're doing like an old-fashioned movie, it makes sense that we're getting like more old-fashioned views than we did in previous movies. Like you're talking about the archetypes of like an older resourceful woman and a young vibrant woman, like that's pretty much like Nausicaa, right? Like that's like the first one that comes to mind for me.
Type, yeah.
Where like, yeah, but like the difference is like Nausicaa, A, is the main character, but B, like has like her own goals and like a way loftier,
so much more agency.
Whereas, right. Here, Theo exists primarily to support Porco's goals, and so because of that, Theo doesn't get like as much to display her own personality, you know. We get the moment when she's like turning the sky pirates on using her logic of like, hey, you need to like show us like using their machismo against them, and like that's like a pretty good moment for Theo. And of course, like we get like her convincing Porco that she can do the job of designing stuff. I'll say like the part where she's talking about like, hey, like, what's the most important thing to building? And is it knowledge? And like, no, it's inspiration. Well, there you go. Like, I don't have knowledge, but I have like the inspiration to do it. Like that in itself is like kind of, at least to me, like a big deal in terms of, you know, like that those are opportunities that will usually only go to males, that like, oh, I don't know how to do this, but I'm gonna like will my way into this job. And you know, having a woman do that, like that's at least a little different than like how it goes in real life. So like I just like, there are feminist moments, but I just think that the romantic angle, it fits very well with Gina, and that's why like I like the Porco Gina aspect, in part because like there's like a more there's more distance going on there's more wistfulness, there's a little bit more of a history, whereas here with Theo, like Theo has just met Porco and all of a sudden is enamored of it. So like I think there's a way to do this right, but I don't think that Theo is Theo being like in that like old enough to begin entertaining this, but still pretty young. Like that's like just a bad chemistry going on there. So like either you make her older and like you flesh out her backstory a little bit more, or you just like get rid of the romance towards Porco entirely and just focus on Gina. So like it's very close, and that's why like I think that this is an okay movie, but like the Theo stuff is like just off enough where like it kind of messes up that second half a little bit. So I think this is summarizing your thoughts as well. There are feminist moments, but there are also like parts, like because of the way that that Theo is positioned so closely to Porco's goals, that kind of limit her as a character as well.
I kind of want to make a little bit of a distinction between romance, which Miyazaki basically disavows throughout most of his filmmaking career. But yeah, Fio kind of like has romantic feelings towards Porco. I think like the desire, like the desire of the perspective, like, yeah, it's the problem that Fio like has these feelings for Porco. But like if it was portrayed, because I feel like Cagliostro does it better, where it's kind of portrayed as just like she's a kid and she has these feelings, but you know, like that movie like has this element too. Not to like say it's like amazing in this aspect, but
and Cagliostro has Fujiko as well, which we praise as like a pretty feminist character, because like she has more of her own age, even though like there's a main male character, but she's kind of doing her own thing on the side, and she's still pretty cool at it. Yeah. Like she, even
and
though
I do think Gina plays that role in this movie. You know, she gets the signal, she goes to alert them, she has her scene with Curtis where she's like rejecting him. You know, Gino does get to do stuff. But yeah, it's just the fact that you can tell that Porco like sees Fio from this like romantic lens, even if he's rejecting her. Like it's just that's an aspect of his perspective on her, and that's the movie's perspective on her. Like I feel like that's the ultimate. But the difference, the ultimate like sin, I guess. But I guess the argument I was kind of trying to make at the end, and I realize this is a very weird argument, but I feel like at least it's truthful. Like Miyazaki, like if Miyazaki could be a little bit more restrained with this, and I don't think he's restrained in his other movies. I think he just shifts the perspective. But if you're gonna show this perspective of Porco, it feels genuine. The fact that this movie looks at Fio from this lens, because that's how society does look at Fios in our world.
I was gonna say, especially when you you consider like the time of which this movie takes place, period, like that's exactly how women were viewed. They were viewed as these agents if they weren't going to fall within like the traditional roles for women, because it was not like widely accepted that women went to go work in factories, and to pick up, you know, I don't want to say like pick up the slack from the men leaving to go do other jobs and things, but like they definitely like stepped up and, you know, did the work, you know, as well as men, if not as better than men. And then, but people still had like a hard time, I guess, accepting it. So, and I think there's also something to be said, like, okay, like Porco, like you know, when you're flying the plane, like you weren't the one who built the plane, like, you know, and that's what like, I guess was winning you the fight up to a certain extent. But then, and this is like extreme feminism, like thought process too. But, you know, like, those women didn't get credit for building that plane. Like Porco got credit for winning his fight or whatever in the air. But I guess like that dissolves because they start, you know, the fist fight in the water. So that's different.
Yeah, we can talk about that.
Yeah, but then like, I mean, you also have to take into account too the fact that like, if Curtis wins, he gets to marry Fio. Like
Fio is put up as a prize. She puts herself like up as a prize.
Yeah, and her worth is that of the work done by other, you know, the value of the work done on Porco's plane. So, I mean, that's not a great comparison to make. But again, like that goes into like the whole like dowry situation, which I mean still exists to this day in some parts of the world, but I mean at that time I believe that it still existed to a large extent. So
yeah, I think it's totally true that this speaks to the time period. I also think like it speaks to now too. I think we still view Fios like 17-year-old girls in like a sexualized sense. As like this, like, and I want to compare this to a current event where there's like been a little bit of a reckoning in the art / kind of comics industry about men who groom younger women like at ages like Fio into like sexual relationships and like the pressure of the industry. And so I think it's like as relevant as ever, this type of thing. And I think that what Porco does at the end of the movie is he kind of like goes the opposite route of, he does not groom Fio. He pushes her away. Nope. He tries to push her away before, like he doesn't want her to come on the plane, but you know, the movie forces it on her, like, which, you know, it's the movie's perspective on it. But then like he like puts her on the ship, never talks to her again, and so I think there's an element of truthfulness to the perspective that it's portraying, and then it shows how even a problematic guy like Porco should eventually also reacts in the situation by not going down that route. It's not my favorite type of movie. I'd rather see the female main character. I'd rather see not this type of sexism or problematic perspective portrayed. But I do think there's some power to this authentic portrayal, and seeing how the characters ultimately react in kind of a non-terrible sense to what happens.
Yeah. I definitely, I agree with that assessment, especially, bringing up the whole grooming of women that does take place today. So I would definitely agree with that. And it's just kind of nice that, yes, again, Porco can be problematic and, is a sexist character, but at the end, he is, I guess, fighting for Theo to have her freedom to not be married, which, is still kind of sexist. Let Theo fight her own battles, but also, the fact that he puts her on the plane and leaves and never sees her again. I wouldn't call that a sad ending. I would call that a very happy ending for her, especially because she does get to become friends with Gina, and they become such good friends that they're in each other's lives until the end. So, which you also, I guess, kind of don't see as much portrayed, because a lot of the times media likes to pit women against each other. So
yeah, that's why it's a striking ending with that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very striking, because again, you just don't really get to see that. They often would pit women. I love that Gina and Theo don't feel threatened by the other person in any way, shape, or form. So
yeah, I agree. And I, to conclude this, I realize that the argument I'm making is kind of a little bit of a weird and different argument from the ones I do typically portray. And I don't think I'm saying what I was talking about with the power of being authentic to that is right. I think if you disagree with it, totally, I don't even fully accept that. Like I said, it's a difficult movie for me to process, even still. But if Alex is it didn't, ultimately there's parts that don't work for me. I'm it still does work for me. So I was kind of trying to explain why and why I still do think this movie's great. But it is challenging.
It works. It works, but yes, it's challenging. Because compared to other Miyazaki films, we do get it from the woman's perspective. And so having it, from Porco's perspective, you're obviously going to see that change in, I guess, how the world is viewed. But it's kind of one of those coming to an acceptance of this is what it was. You can't necessarily change that. But
as a generous take on what the movie's doing. Yeah.
Yes.
Which could be true, but yeah, the positive perspective take on what the movie's doing, yes. I guess. Yeah. Alex, anything else on this topic?
Just one, Cagliostro, I think, does this all a lot better while still also being in an old timey setting. It handles this stuff a lot smoother, I think. So the idea that just because we're in the old setting excuses it, I'm not I just can't be totally on board with that, because I've seen Miyazaki do better with this with a similar premise.
It's
but
not excusable. It's
just contents, yeah. But also I don't want to lose the thread. Porco improved. It's small, but Porco improves as a character over the course of this movie, and that I think is something important to the interpretation of him. We can say he's a problematic character because of the sexist stuff he says, especially in the first half of the movie. But I think that the movie does a good enough job of showing that over time he comes to accept that the new worldview as he's forced to come back into society. And he accepts Theo's help Theo is the one who like devises this whole plan of challenging Curtis again and offering herself up, and he goes with it. You can argue that he should maybe like step in to stop this, but at the same time, like she's allowing Theo to make her own decisions in that sense as well. So like it just like and of course at the end like he makes the final decision to like put her away because he realizes where that's going. So like I just I on the whole I think that it remains a feminist movie just because like while it does display sexism in different parts, I think that overall the movie does a good job of showing Porco improving in that aspect over the course of the movie.
Yeah, do you think he improves? And like we were talking about, kind of like bookended with his decision with Theo at the end. Kind of to wrap up the Cagliostro comparisons, I agree that Cagliostro handles this type of thing better. It's different still because of the different perspective. Like I was kind of talking about, and like for content, I do think Porco would be for me a better movie than Cagliostro, but mostly for other reasons. You know, like we haven't talked a lot about the plane scenes, which I think are incredible, spectacular animation. Just, I think the surrounding political context in this movie makes this movie really, really strong in a way which, Cagliostro treats kind of whimsically with stuff that's going on, but that's kind of like what it's going for, you know, it's kind of like a different genre of movie. You know, like I think the characters are stronger in this movie, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, I think this movie has a lot, just as a quick, not to make the point being comparing it to Cagliostro, but just kind of like the strengths of this movie they don't necessarily hit on a ton. Because I do think Theo and Gina, as I talked about, really good character. I think Porco is like I'll talk about a really, really great main character. So you know, I think Curtis is a really fun villain. The Mama Aito head ends up being really funny. The scene with him like knocking everyone else out of the way to take the picture.
That's a good shot. Yeah.
It's like one of my biggest laughs in a Miyazaki movie, honestly. It is in the context of all these grown pirates lusting over this 17-year-old girl, which again, similarity to I mean, you know, it's like playful version of like lusting or whatever, but you know, that's what we assume is at the core, but badly. But yeah, like that you can make the comparison to Castle in the Sky. More creepy in that movie because it's a 13-year-old girl here in there. But it's also even more playful, I guess, in that movie. But this is kind of like the another recurring element that Miyazaki shows sometimes of like older men like focusing on, at the very least, girls, which is like weird in the context of the rest of his feminism, is probably like truthful, I guess, like in how the world works. But it's interesting, and then it's played for comedic purposes. I think we talked about it a little bit in that movies podcast too. Okay. Quickly, some things to start to wrap up here. April, any plain comments on how this movie handles
I
planes?
would love to know like the extent of Miyazaki's aviation knowledge, because like it felt very accurate and like wonderfully animated as well. Like I felt like I could have been watching a like actual movie of a dogfight or something along those lines. So I like that we kind of kept it grounded in a sense that you know, they weren't doing like crazy flips all over the place, which would not happen, especially with that type of aircraft. But so I just think that that's like a lovely thing, is that he could be true to the I guess the industry, and also I think that the American Curtis is like a nod to one of the people who like helped the Wright brothers.
He shares the name with a real guy.
Yeah, so I think that's especially cool. Like
Glenn Hammond Curtis.
Yeah, I was like, I don't remember his name exactly, but
there's a section on the Wikipedia article right now about all the plane expertise.
Really?
Yeah.
That's great.
and I think Miyazaki, in addition to storyboarding every scene in every of his movies, insists on also animating every frame of the plane scenes specifically. So it's a lot of that in this movie.
Yeah.
one of the engines says Ghibli, and I was like, man, why aren't Ghibli movies like Pixar where they have like A113 in every movie? Like they should just have the word Ghibli hidden somewhere in every movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ghibli comes from a plane, so I don't know if it was like the literal like historical use of Ghibli, but I think he got it from like a random plane. So that's how it starts with anyway. So it's appropriate in this case, I would say. Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot of deep discussion like we've talked about past stuff with the planes, but it's a huge aspect of this movie. And is this a plane comment?
Well, yeah, I'll say like I'm not as into plane animation, like so like that probably plays into my opinion of the movie since that's like a big deal with it. But the scene when they're Theo and him are and the secret hideout, and he's talking about the story of him like getting knocked out in the clouds, and then you see like all the planes like going up into the sky, and it's like a representation for maybe heaven or the afterlife. Like that scene in particular was just like one of the most beautiful shots I've seen in any of these movies. So like that part stood out to me, just like all the planes.
I agree. That's like
together.
Just that scene we haven't talked about yet. I think that's one of the standout scenes of the movie.
Absolutely.
Based on Roald Dahl's story, They Shall Not Grow Old. Apparently it is a pretty straight adaptation of that story, that scene that they tell. But yeah, that's a really gorgeous scene, very powerful in the placement and the animation and everything. That was like the main scene we hadn't talked about. I would have wanted to talk about too. I get I want to talk about Hotel Adriano. I think in terms of animation, just the background shots and the animation on the hotel and the surrounding Adriatic Sea, I think, is a real highlight for me too. Alex, any other scenes you want to highlight from the movie?
Animation wise, the scene I enjoyed was the ending fight between the fist fight between Curtis and Porco. As he was like that with each like round of punches, you see it, you got like the more bulges coming out, like red spots. Porco can barely see out of one eye. So I just love when you can get a little grotesque with it. And so they did well to take advantage of that opportunity. I love seeing facial stuff.
I do really like the dogfight. For me, the most striking part is the character aspect of Porco. He doesn't kill, and he's not trying to kill Curtis, whereas vice versa he is.
Is that a Michael Keaton thing? Because Batman doesn't kill.
I don't think that this is...
Unless it's the recent films.
Well, it's not Christian Bale, is it? It's Michael Keaton.
Maybe that's why they got him.
By the way, I haven't commented on the dub. I watched like 15 minutes of the dub. My only thoughts are, Michael Keaton does not bring the same energy that the Japanese voice actor does. He sounds very like chill, which is just not what Porco Rosso is, so that's a misunderstanding of the character. And B, Susan Egan is really cool, and she should do. Steven Universe is voice actress as well, so she's good. Those are my thoughts on the dub.
Nice. And Gina in the original, voiced by Tokiko Kato, who's a singer and sings the ending song, I think too, and sings the Gina's performance towards the beginning of the movie. That scene is very striking too. Just seeing Gina's singing that song we mentioned, "Time of the Cherries." In the hotel. I was gonna talk about a different scene, but April, comments. You said you love the music for this movie. Is it so we talked about that song, and then at the end there's once in a while talk of the old days that plays over the credits, which I really love that song in the context of the movie. Comments on those, or just the actual score by Joe Hisaishi?
The actual score, because I've said this in multiple podcasts, but I love whenever like the music can enhance what's taking place and doesn't take away from what's happening. Especially like whenever like we're in the air, like I just really enjoyed that music. It was like very lively and like alive, and I was like, yeah, I'm up in the air too, but I'm not really. I'm sitting on my couch. So you can feel the scene more whenever like the music plays into it. And again, like obviously like I noticed it, but like if you don't notice the music, I feel like that's always more effective as well. Or because it adds so much to what's taking place in front of you.
Yeah, I think Hisaishi's Porco soundtrack is great. It's so different from his other stuff. All of we've seen already a just incredible range of Hisaishi music in these different movies. This one is really good. What I was going to say was, but Porco not killing at the end definitely reminded me of Aang in the Avatar series finale. So I could see that being inspired on. I mean, it's different tones, I guess, but as we know, Avatar takes from Miyazaki a lot of times.
Well, it also just plays into the whole anti-war stance of all of his movies. Like Porco may have left it because he doesn't feel like killing.
Yeah, and I think it's a more personal. I think it's a strong personal detail to Porco that really does speak well to him. Him not killing. And yeah, in the beginning, he tries to save the school kids. That's like I mentioned in the beginning. That's really one of my favorite scenes is just the kids gleefully being kidnapped.
They're just so excited.
Yeah.
And I love it. Are we your hostages?
Yeah.
Are you real pirates? Like
it's maybe my favorite scene.
What is it like? They're just like running around and they're like, this isn't a playground. And they're like, oh, what's up here? And they're like, okay, but only for a second. Like,
yeah.
And then they all start jumping off. They start abandoning the plane.
The Mama Ito is also very funny throughout the movie, as I mentioned, with the picture and just in general. That's a whole nother. There's like a pirate federation. It's a very like not explored mythological detail of this movie. There's one scene where they like provoke Porco, and that's kind of it.
It kind of what is it? It makes me think of like in John Wick. Like you don't conduct business on continental grounds kind of thing. Like
yeah, they go into between the countries and the sea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like it. Yeah, it's more pirates too. Okay, April. Anything else you can think of from the movie you want to hit on?
No, I feel like we hit everything, and I got to have my feminist rant, so that's great.
That is great. Yeah. It's a taxing discussion at the end there, but it's a necessary and complicated thing for this movie to talk about. Alex, anything else from Porco Rosso?
Pigs are cool, you guys.
I knew you were going to talk about pigs.
Wait, Alex, have you seen a plane in real life?
Have I seen a plane in real life?
Yeah, because we asked if you've seen a pig.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's actually a good point. I don't think I've seen like a one-person plane in real life.
I've seen like a commercial plane.
Yeah, like I've obviously been on like an American Airlines flight, but like I've never been on like one of those like
a little Cessna.
Yeah, one of those things.
You're like, yeah, sure.
I'm frightened by them, but as someone who follows sports and knows many athletes who have died from football plane crashes.
As you should be.
But, yeah, which is all the more reason I admire Porco for his bravery in continuing to fly that thing. We've got to some serious discussion here, but I hope that doesn't overshadow the fact that this is a fun movie. You can like put it on and it'll like you can just like lay back in your seat and just let it wash over you. Like there's not actually that much like stressful going on in this movie, so like
also 90 minutes that helps.
Yeah, also 90 minutes. So yeah, it's just a fun, relaxing movie. Maybe not like in the top tier of Miyazaki to me, but like it has its fans, and for good reason, because Porco is fun.
Yeah, I would say that's a good summary of this movie's place in the canon. There's certain people, potentially me included, that would put this pretty far up there for Miyazaki, but then not necessarily as canonically great as I don't know what canonically means in this context, as some of the Spirited Away type movies. General opinion, but I'm glad people have exposure to Porco Rosso now from it being on streaming, because I do think is of the Miyazaki major movies is one of the least viewed ones in the US at least. So I'm happy people are getting to see it. Glad we got into all these aspects of Porco Rosso. And next week, big shift to Ocean Waves, the one nobody has seen. So we're very excited to talk about Ocean Waves.
And then Pompoko, which is another one that has two words ending in, or wait, no, it's only one word ending in O. Never mind. But just Porco Rosso, Pompoko, they sound similar.
Those do sound similar, yeah. So we got last major Miyazaki movie for a little bit here on the Ghibli Rewatch series, but we have the least major movie to talk about next time, and then some people consider Pompoko a major one, and then some Whisper the Heart, and then getting into Mononoke. So let us know what you thought of Porco Rosso, our discussion on Porco Rosso. Find all the ways to contact us at overlyanimated.com. Consider supporting us at Patreon, patreon.com/overlyanimated. Thanks to our current patrons, especially our patron of the podcast, Steve. And thanks as always to our patron executive producers, Ryan, Steve, Alex, Beatrice, Hugh, Michael, Needle, and Phonician. Back for Ocean Waves next week. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you then. Bye.
Arrivederci.
Bye.